Merci, Nina. Thank you, Nina. Today marks the anniversary of the first COVID-19 infection in Canada. And since that first day, there have been over 19,000 deaths. And sometimes it's hard to imagine what that loss looks like. What does it mean to lose 19,000 of our loved ones, seniors, frontline workers, people we care for? And I think there's a story that just came out that really captures the pain of this loss. I want to talk about Yassine Dabbe. Yassine was a 19-year-old Syrian refugee who fled war to build a better life for himself and his family. And here in Canada, he was working as a contract worker at a for-profit long-term care home. He contracted COVID-19 working at this long-term care home and died. His family also, being exposed to Yassine, who is a frontline worker, have also contracted COVID-19. Yassine is the picture of the terrible toll of COVID-19. A frontline worker, a Syrian refugee trying to build a better life who lost his life. And that's why more than ever, we need to redouble our efforts. We need to focus on getting vaccines into the arms of vulnerable, and that means seniors in long-term care, but also frontline workers like Yassine. We also need to make sure that any worker who is sick can take time and stay home. We need to make sure it's easier for paid sick days. It's easier for workers to stay at home. And that's why we're going to continue to push for changes to the paid sick leave program that we fought for at the federal level. Problems and holes that we saw from a long time need to be fixed. And finally, we need to make sure that the profit is removed from long-term care. There is no place for profit in the care of our seniors, and the horrible toll experienced by seniors and the workers at those long-term care centers really makes that point clear. And that's going to be a focus of our return to Parliament. How do we help Canadians? How do we support people in this difficult time? And finally, making sure everyone gets vaccinated. Mais c'est tellement clair qu'on a vu des impacts horribles causés par la COVID-19. Aujourd'hui marque l'anniversaire de première propagation de la COVID-19 ici au Canada. Et puis, après le premier cas de la COVID-19, on a perdu plus de 19 000 Canadiens et Canadiennes. Et pour expliquer cette perte, l'impact de cette perte, l'impact de nos aînés qui sont impactés, frappés par le COVID-19, les travailleurs de première ligne qui étaient frappés aussi, je vais partager l'histoire de Yassine Dabbe. Yassine était syrien, un réfugié, et il a voulu créer une meilleure vie pour lui-même et pour sa famille. Et il a travaillé dans un centre de soins de longue durée. Et il était infecté par la COVID-19 et il a perdu sa vie. Et maintenant, sa famille aussi a été infectée à cause du fait qu'il a travaillé dans un centre de soins de longue durée. Et cette perte marque l'impact de la COVID-19. Et c'est toujours important de penser des personnes, des êtres humains devant les chiffres. Et ça, c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, on fait doubler nos efforts pour faire face à la COVID-19. On exige le gouvernement de faire 3 choses immédiatement. Premièrement, d'améliorer l'accès à la congé de maladie payée. Ça, c'est essentiel, c'est un outil essentiel pour faire face à la COVID-19. Deuxièmement, c'est clair plus que jamais qu'il n'y a pas de place pour les profits pour soigner nos aînés dans les centres de soins de longue durée. Et finalement, l'importance de vacciner toute la population, et ça doit être une priorité. Et on va continuer de pousser pour les gens, pour ces éléments, pour ces enjeux, et de se battre pour les gens. Vous pouvez compter sur nous. Merci beaucoup et je suis prêt pour vos questions. Thank you very much. I'm ready for your questions now.
Merci beaucoup, M. Singh. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Donc, si vous avez une question, je vous demanderai d'utiliser la fonction « Lever la main » au bas de la page. If you have a question, I would just please ask you to use the function « Raise hand » at the bottom of the page. and I will call on you in order of in the order that appears in front of me, et je vais vous appeler dans l'ordre dont je vois ici sur ma liste. Alors, on va commencer avec Catherine Lévesque avec la presse canadienne. C'est à vous.
Oui, bon lundi, Monsieur Singh.
Bonjour.
J'aimerais vous parler des interdictions de voyage. Je sais que la question est arrivée la semaine dernière, mais je voulais juste réitérer, est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec l'imposition d'une quarantaine dans un hôtel, une quarantaine qui doit être payée par les voyageurs? Est-ce que vous êtes en faveur de cette mesure-là?
La mesure de quarantaine a été utilisée dans les autres pays et ça a fonctionné. Jusqu'à Nouvelle-Zélande a utilisé la même chose aussi, l'Australie, et c'était quelque chose qui a aidé beaucoup pour réduire la propagation de la COVID-19. Donc, je pense que cette idée, c'est important. Je suis ouvert à mettre en place une mesure similaire que ce qu'on a vu à travers le monde, une mesure qui a fonctionné. Donc, je suis ouvert à ça. Aussi, les gens parlent d'une limite, une réduction, une limite effectivement sur les voyages non essentiels. Et c'est aussi quelque chose qu'on est ouvert. Il faut à ce moment, je pense, penser de toutes les options et d'évaluer toutes les options possibles pour réduire la propagation de la COVID-19.
En anglais, s'il vous plaît, M. Singh.
Yes, in English on the same question. We've seen the use of quarantines, very firm and strict quarantines for travelers, work very effectively in other jurisdictions. I think of New Zealand and Australia, who've been very firm on this, and it's been very effective. So I'm open to similar measures, enforcing a strict quarantine of 14 days, making sure that it happens in a hotel or another facility similarly, but it's firm and it's required and it's monitored, something very clear like we've seen in other countries. I think it's been useful and we should be open to it. I also think that the question around non-essential travel, that there should be a firm limit. Right now, it's not clear if you're traveling and it's non-essential by air, that option is still available. I think we need to look at that again and say, is there a way for us to limit that to make sure we're doing everything possible to stop the spread of COVID-19?
Donc, en suivi, justement, comment est-ce qu'on limite ces voyages-là? Je pense que par le passé, vous avez parlé de fermer les frontières carrément. Donc, comment est-ce qu'on devrait s'y prendre? Est-ce qu'on devrait donner des visas aux gens qui voudraient sortir du pays? Qu'est-ce que vous proposez?
Donc, la façon, c'est au gouvernement de trouver, mais il y a des autres pays qui ont fait la même chose. Donc, l'idée, c'est de montrer c'est quoi la raison avant de voyager. Il y a beaucoup des façons, des pratiques pour mettre en œuvre cette idée, cette politique, cette pratique. Donc, je suis ouvert comment on le fait, mais la nécessité, c'est clair, et les autres pays ont déjà fait ça.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Christopher Reynolds with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. One thing I'm curious about is, I know you've mentioned many times before the importance of getting the Canadian government out of for-profit long-term care and indeed eradicating for-profit long-term care in total. I was hoping you could offer a more concrete path to doing that. I know you've mentioned a Crown Corporation-owned long-term care facility or company, Rivera, but how exactly can long-term care be turned completely non-profit in Canada? Is it through legislation? Is it a very gradual process? Is it very all in one go? Please enlighten us.
Certainly. So with the Rivera situation, that would be a one-time thing. It can happen right away. One time as an immediate step. It can be done right away. It's a Crown Corporation. It is owned by the federal pension. And it is something that the federal government could immediately step in and say, we're going to make this public, work with provinces in the delivery of care, but immediately make a profit. Rivera represents one of the largest long-term care providers in the country. So that would have a massive impact. And some of the worst examples of conditions for seniors were seen in Rivera owned and operated homes. So that would make a big difference. And then the next step, how do we get rid of for-profit entirely? I think one of the things that we've seen in the past that has worked is our Canada Health Act. When we tied funding to those principles, that it's publicly administered, that it's universally accessible, it's transferable, all the principles that make up the Canada Health Act. If we use those same principles and apply that to long-term care and say, well, we're not going to provide any funding unless it meets these criteria, it would require that a for-profit home not receive funding. And I think that would be one way for us to reduce the funding that goes to long-term care, that's for-profit, increase the funding for the not-for-profit, for the publicly funded. And in doing so, we are moving towards, we are putting a clear message, we need to move towards public. There's also ideas around putting a moratorium on any new beds. They have to be public or not-for-profit. They cannot be for-profit. There's a lot of ways to do it. Really, the question I'm putting forward is, will the federal government, will Justin Trudeau show the leadership in taking some of these key steps that can be taken right now? We'll need to work with provinces to make this completely possible. But I think that the evidence is overwhelmingly clear. For-profit has taken the lives of seniors, means worse conditions, worse staffing levels. For-profit that has no place in our healthcare system. It certainly has no place in the care of our seniors. And whether we're talking about long-term care or home care, it has no place.
Turning to the former Governor General, Julie Payette, should she, in light of all the allegations of a toxic workplace against her, be allowed to receive the pretty generous annuity that is typically the right, or it's typically received by governors general after they retire?
In that situation, there's a couple of things that people are really upset about, and I think it's a very fair concern. One is that the Governor General resigned, and secondly, resigned in light of a report that shows some really troubling examples of harassment of staff and poor work conditions. Given those two elements, people are wondering, why would someone receive what seems like a reward for this really bad behavior? So really, this question has to be directed to Justin Trudeau. What was the agreement that he put in place that precipitated the resignation? What was the agreement that he struck that the Governor General then resigned? We need to know if there was an agreement and what that agreement was, and if that included continuing to receive that annuity. That's a very fair question. People are really worried. On a personal note, I think that we should not be rewarding that type of behavior when someone resigns. In light of a report like that, I don't think that that sits well with Canadians.
En français, s'il vous plaît, sur la dernière question, M. Singh.
OK, oui, bien sûr. Donc, dans ce cas, les Canadiens et Canadiennes ont soulevé deux enjeux. Un, le fait que le gouvernement général a démissionné elle-même de cette poste. Et deuxièmement, le fait qu'elle a démissionné dans le contexte d'un rapport qui montre clairement des harcèlements des travailleurs et travailleuses. Et c'était quelque chose qui soulève des grandes inquiétudes. Et dans ce cas, les Canadiens sont inquiets. Pourquoi le gouverneur général reçoit d'argent après tout ça? Et je suis d'accord qu'il y a des inquiétudes avec ça, mais il faut demander à Justin Trudeau, c'était quoi l'entente entre lui et le gouverneur général pour le fait qu'elle a démissionné elle-même de cette poste. Et c'est une question, je pense que une question importante. Et j'exige le gouvernement libéral et Justin Trudeau de répondre à cette question.
Thank you very much. I have next Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Thanks for your question, for taking the time. If you could just follow up on Chris's question from the Canadian press around what you would actually do. Are you advocating for changes to the laws around Governor General's compensation, or what specifically do you want to see happen now?
Certainly. On that question, I've said that there seems to be, or there must have been, some sort of agreement between the Prime Minister, between Justin Trudeau and the Governor General. What was that agreement that precipitated the resignation? Was there an agreement? What was that agreement? I think Canadians are concerned that this behavior is being rewarded, and it's different than in other examples. This was a resignation and it was a resignation in the context of a report. So I think that's some serious concerns are raised by it, and I think we need to ask the Prime Minister what was the agreement.
Okay, so can you please clarify if that means you want to see changes to the legislation, which is what stipulates what governors general get? And my second question is following up on Catherine's question earlier. Do you support getting travel bans, or do you only want to see quarantine hotels? Like, are you also in favor of travel bans, or is your focus solely on the quarantine hotels?
On your second question, I'm open to both. I think that both have been used in other countries. Well, I know both have been used and they've been effective. So the quarantine measures are in place and have been effective in reducing the spread that comes from international travel. So I think that's important. And secondarily, people are raising concerns around the fact that it's more difficult to travel within your own province, or frankly within Canada. Right now, it's more difficult to travel within Canada than it is to jump on a flight and travel across the world. So some measure to limit non-essential international or air travel. I think there's a strong case to be made. I'm open to both, and we're happy to look at legislation or any regulations to support those two measures. On the first question, I'm open to that, looking at the legislation if there's changes that can be made. What I'm saying is that there seems to have been some agreement between Justin Trudeau and the Governor General to get to this point of a resignation. What was that agreement? What did Justin Trudeau agree would happen for the Governor General? I think those are important questions.
J'aimerais juste répéter, si vous avez une question, veuillez utiliser la fonction lever la main au bas de la page. I just wanted to repeat that if you have a question, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of the page. Next, I have David Thurton with the CBC. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Thanks for taking our questions. Should the Prime Minister apologize to the staff at Radio Hall?
Certainly. I think the Prime Minister should certainly apologize. A number of things happen here. One, there seems to be clear concerns around the vetting process, that the treatment of workers at Radio Hall could have been expected given a bit of a vet, would have learned that similar things happened in the past when it comes to the Governor General's treatment of employees. So that's something that puts responsibility on Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government. So I think that's one. Secondly, this has been going on for a while. People have been raising concerns. Workers have been raising concerns for a while now, and they had no way to really resolve those concerns. So given all of that, and the fact that this was an appointment made by Justin Trudeau, who failed to take the steps to do the proper vetting, absolutely the workers deserve an apology. And I think it's been really hard on them, and it's been very unfair.
David, just before your follow-up, Jagmeet en français, s'il vous plaît.
OK, oui. Est-ce que le Premier ministre doit s'excuser pour ce qui s'est passé à Radio Hall? Oui, bien sûr. L'impact sur les travailleurs et travailleuses était horrible. Le rapport montre des éléments tellement inquiétants. Et oui, aussi, c'était clair que le gouverneur général était impliqué avec cette même sorte de pratique dans le passé aussi. Donc, si le gouvernement libéral a fait le travail nécessaire, ils auront pu identifier ces mêmes problèmes qui étaient dans le passé aussi. Deuxièmement, on sait que les problèmes à Radio Hall étaient là depuis longtemps et les travailleurs là n'avons pas une chemin à suivre pour soulever ces problèmes. Ça, c'est aussi un grand problème. Donc oui, bien sûr, Justin Trudeau, le Premier ministre, doit s'excuser pour ce qui s'est passé. La responsabilité tombe sur les pieds de Justin Trudeau, effectivement, parce que c'était sa choix.
Do you feel that this whole situation has created a mini constitutional crisis or a small constitutional crisis, as Conservative leader Erin O'Toole said earlier today? And just what are your concerns about Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, selecting a candidate without consulting parties like yourself?
I think the crisis here it's a workplace crisis. This is a crisis about the treatment of workers and a lack of due diligence in making sure that someone is selected that could do the job and would not put those workers in a bad situation. I think really it's a failure when it comes to protecting workers who did not deserve to go through this. And as a result, it certainly created a distraction from a pandemic and the focus, which should be entirely on making sure people are vaccinated. That should be our only focus right now, and making sure people are healthy, people are supported, people get the help they need, small businesses are supported. The focus should be on the pandemic and the struggles that we're going through. And this has become a distraction that is clearly Justin Trudeau's fault and should not have happened. And David, I forgot the second part of your question.
Yeah, just, should you be consulted,
yes.
on the next candidate?
Yes, certainly. Yes, I raised this concern before that when it comes to the selection process, not just of the Governor General, but in general, the selection process in Canada at the federal level has a lot of flaws in it. Right now, the federal government, whoever is in power, the majority government in power, can just choose whoever they want effectively when it comes to a commissioner, when it comes to the Governor General. And we have in provincial governments a much more rigid, and in fact, in fairness, a much better process. I was on the committee that chose the Auditor General in Ontario, and the process was every official party had one member, all the members had to agree, and the selection process was chaired by the Speaker, but the votes in terms of agreement had to come from the members, which represented all parties. A much better process. We all had a say, we all asked questions, and I think that's a far better process. Just, we need to look at what is the best way for us to choose people in positions of power that will be chosen with a rigorous process that is not going to be handpicked by one majority government, but chosen by everyone involved, that can ensure that the process and the selection is in the best interest of the country.
Thank you very much. Boris Proulx avec Le Devoir, la parole est à vous.
Bonjour, M. Singh, merci de prendre ma question. Je reviens sur le sujet des voyageurs. Vous avez mentionné en anglais différentes choses comme votre soutien à la quarantaine obligatoire dans un hôtel aux frais des voyageurs. Et vous avez mentionné aussi la limite peut-être ou une restriction du transport aérien. Pourriez-vous me dire en gros qu'est-ce que vous aimeriez voir dans le meilleur scénario à l'égard des voyageurs là, non essentiels?
Oui, il y a deux éléments que j'ai soulevés, les deux éléments qu'on a vus dans les autres pays. Ce sont premièrement une quarantaine stricte, quelque chose comme on a vu à Nouvelle-Zélande, aussi en Australie. Ces deux pays, ils ont mis en place une quarantaine tellement forte et ça a fonctionné. Je suis ouvert à mettre en œuvre la même chose au Canada. Et deuxièmement, j'ai dit que c'est plus facile maintenant de voyager, c'est plus difficile de voyager dans nos propres pays. Au Canada, c'est plus difficile de voyager, mais c'est plus facile de voyager dans un avion à travers le monde. Donc, ça me semble comme un problème. Donc, les gens ont soulevé ça comme un peu d'hypocrisie, le fait que c'est plus difficile dans notre propre pays et c'est plus facile de voyager international. Donc, une limite sur les voyages non essentiels, c'est quelque chose que les autres pays ont mis en place et je suis ouvert. Donc, les deux choses, une quarantaine et une limite sur le voyage, ce sont des choses que les autres pays ont fait et je pense qu'on doit l'évaluer aussi au Canada.
D'accord. En question de suivi, il semble que le gouvernement veut agir rapidement maintenant pour modifier sa loi pour que les voyageurs qui reviennent de l'étranger n'aient plus accès aux 1 000 $ du gouvernement. Est-ce que vous allez supporter ça pour un changement rapide de la loi ou est-ce que vous voyez des problèmes législatifs à l'égard de ça?
Sans doute, on appuie l'idée de fermer cette loophole, ce problème. Je pense que ce n'est pas acceptable. Mais ce qu'on veut faire, c'est beaucoup des experts ont soulevé le fait que les congés de maladie payés, c'est essentiel comme un outil pour faire face à la COVID-19. C'était identifié comme un outil, un des plus importants. Donc, ce qu'on veut faire, si on va changer la loi il faut aussi améliorer l'accès pour les gens qui en ont besoin. Et j'ai commencé aujourd'hui en parlant de Yacine Dabé. Et ce qui s'est passé, c'est un homme de 19 ans. Il travaille dans un centre de soins de longue durée. Il est tombé malade avec le COVID-19 et il était mort. Il a perdu sa vie. Et c'est clair plus que jamais qu'on doit améliorer l'accès aux congés des maladies payés. Les médecins, les experts de santé publique ont dit que c'est un des plus importants pour réduire la propagation de la COVID-19 dans les milieux de travail. Et les milieux de travail, c'est le milieu un des plus responsables pour la propagation de la COVID-19.
Merci beaucoup. Juste avant d'aller aux personnes qui ont déjà posé une question, je vais juste finir avec ma liste de personnes qui n'ont pas encore posé de questions. So next, I have Mary Brooke with Island Social Trends. Please go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Thanks for taking my question.
Of course. Hi.
So I'm looking at the vaccine rollout, which is generally by age across Canada now. It varies province to province, but I'm particularly looking at the distressed economic impact on youth and the fact that a lot of them are now long haulers dealing with COVID over the long term. This is going to impact the healthcare system, more people to care for with disabilities over time. And I'm just looking at how the NDP might be looking at spreading vaccination across all ages as opposed to just doing from the oldest age down.
I think when it comes to these type of decisions, we really need to consult the public health experts. What is in the best interest of Canada's health and the people that are working? I think that in terms of who is important that I've seen in terms of public health experts' advice, the most vulnerable have to be amongst the first. And frontline workers who are at a higher risk of exposure. I think that's also essential. But these are decisions that we need to consult with those who are experts and give us, and that they should give us the best advice around what is going to protect our country, the people in our country in the best way possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, do you have a follow-up?
No, not today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. La dernière question va à Catherine Lévesque avec la presse canadienne.
Oui, rebonjour, M. Singh. Je voulais revenir sur la gouverneure générale. Donc, vous avez demandé à M. Trudeau de s'excuser pour ses actions, mais est-ce que c'est suffisant ou est-ce que les victimes devraient être compensées, comme ce qu'on a vu là, avec l'ancien sénateur Don Meredith? Là?
C'est une bonne question et je vais commencer en disant toute cette situation était évitable. Et c'est vraiment la responsabilité du gouvernement libéral, de Justin Trudeau. Ils ont choisi le gouverneur général. Et l'impact de ça, c'était une condition de travail horrible. Le rapport a mentionné des éléments tellement inquiétants. Donc, l'excuse, c'est un premier pas. Mais vous avez raison, ce n'est pas suffisant pour les travailleurs et travailleuses qui ont vécu des années de harcèlement. Donc, il faut aussi penser de c'est quoi la manière de vraiment compenser ces travailleurs.
Catherine, as-tu une question de suivi?
Oui, donc juste pour être bien certaine de comprendre, donc vous seriez en faveur à ce qu'on compense ou on donne un montant d'argent aux travailleurs qui se sont sentis lésés? Je veux juste m'assurer de bien vous citer là-dessus. Oui,
je suis ouvert au fait que ces travailleurs aient été impactés et ils méritent pas seulement une excuse, mais quelque chose qui reconnaître l'impact de ça. Donc, je suis ouvert aux discussions de compensation. Peut-être ils vont eux-mêmes poursuivre cette situation dans la cause de justice et donc ils vont avoir une réponse là, mais je pense qu'ils méritent pas seulement une excuse, mais une reconnaissance de l'impact sur ces vies.
Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. This concludes the press conference. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thank you.